It was a crisp, golden afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood kind where kids' laughter echoed through the streets and every lawn seemed to glow in the sunlight. Amid peaceful setting, no one could have predicted that this ordinary day would soon turn into an unforgettable tale of bravery, loyalty, and unbreakable bond between a child and their best furry friend. The story began with a young boy full of energy and wonder playing in the backyard of his family home. He was just like any child, curious about the world around him, his little hands exploring grass and rocks as his imagination turned ordinary objects into magical treasures. Watching over him was his family's puppy, a scrappy little rescue with a fluffy coat and eyes that sparkled with intelligence. This puppy wasn't just a pet, he was a friend, a protector, and, as it turned out, a hero in the making. The puppy had been with family for only a few months, but in that short time, he had already become an irreplaceable part of their lives. Though small, he had a bold spirit, always sticking close to Boy, following him wherever his little feet wandered. The two shared an unspoken connection, the kind only a child and their loyal dog can understand, a bond built on trust, love, and countless shared adventures in the backyard. As Boy played near garden, his laughter blending with the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, something shifted in the air. The puppy, usually playful and carefree, suddenly stood alert. His ears perked up, and his tail stiffened. It was as if he sensed something the humans hadn't noticed yet. His little body quivered, but not from fear. No, this was something different. He was ready to protect his human no matter what. Just beyond the boy's play area, hidden in the shadows of the trees, a subtle movement disrupted the calm. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, a flicker of motion that could easily be mistaken for the wind. But the puppy's sharp instincts told him otherwise. There was something or someone approaching, and it wasn't friendly. Before anyone could react, the puppy let out a bark, sharp and commanding, unlike any sound he had made before. The boy, startled by the sudden noise, paused in his play and looked around. His innocent eyes searched for what had caught his furry companion's attention, but he saw nothing unusual. Yet, the puppy didn't relax. He placed himself between the boy and the unseen threat, his tiny body tense, his gaze fixed on the source of the disturbance. And then it happened. What came next would change the course of the day and their lives forever. The tension in the air grew heavier as the puppy held his ground. His small frame was a stark contrast to the bravery blazing in his eyes. He barked again, louder this time, the sound echoing across the quiet backyard. Inside the house, the boy's mother heard the commotion and instinctively glanced out the kitchen window. At first, she only saw her son standing near the garden, looking confused, and the puppy barking at something invisible. But something about the scene made her heart race. She wiped her hands on a towel and headed toward the back door, her footsteps quickening. The boy, still too young to grasp the weight of the situation, called out to his puppy in his usual cheerful voice. "What is it, boy? Did you find something?" He laughed softly, thinking it was another game, but the puppy didn't respond. His focus remained locked on the line of trees at the edge of the yard, where shadows danced and shifted. The boy took a small step closer, curious, but the puppy darted in front of him, blocking his path. He growled this time, a low, warning sound that seemed impossible coming from such a small creature. The boy stopped, startled by the growl. He had never heard his playful friend sound like that before. His mother appeared at the door, her voice cutting through the growing tension. "What's going on out here?" she called, her tone a mix of concern and authority. Her eyes quickly scanned the yard, searching for what might be causing the unusual behavior. She walked closer, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't fully explain. The puppy barked again, then glanced back at her, as if trying to communicate something urgent. She crouched down and reached out to calm him, but the moment her hand touched his fur, she felt the tension radiating from him. It was as if he were a coiled spring, ready to launch into action at the slightest provocation. She followed his gaze to the trees, but all she saw were leaves swaying gently in the breeze. Still, her instincts told her to stay alert. "Come on, let's go inside," she said softly, scooping up her son and holding him close. But the puppy didn't move. Instead, he inched closer to the trees, his nose twitching, his body taut. The boy squirmed in her arms, wanting to go back down. "Puppy's just playing, Mommy," he said, his voice filled with innocence. But she wasn't so sure anymore. As she turned to head back toward the house, a faint sound reached her ears, a rustling, too deliberate to be the wind. She froze, her grip on her son tightening. The puppy barked again, and this time, there was no mistaking it. He was trying to warn them. Her mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Was it a stray animal? Someone trespassing? She didn't want to wait to find out. She called out to the puppy, her voice trembling slightly, "Come here, boy. Let's go inside." But he refused to budge. He took another step toward the trees, his growl deepening. For a moment, she considered going after him, but her maternal instincts told her to prioritize getting her son to safety first. She turned and hurried back toward the house, her heart thundering in her chest. Just as she reached the back door, the puppy let out a sharp, frantic bark, followed by a high-pitched whine. She spun around, fear gripping her. "No!" she cried, but the puppy had already disappeared into the shadows of the trees. Her son wriggled in her arms, calling for his furry friend, his voice growing more distressed with each passing second. She felt torn, every fiber of her being wanted to run after the puppy, but the weight of her son in her arms reminded her of her primary responsibility. Inside the house, she locked the door and grabbed her phone, dialing her husband. Her hand shook as she tried to explain what was happening. "Something's out there," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The dog ran into the trees, and I don't know what's going on. It doesn't feel right." Her husband's voice on the other end was calm but urgent. "Stay inside with the boy. I'll be home as fast as I can. Don't go outside, okay? Just stay safe." She nodded, even though he couldn't see her, and hung up. She paced the kitchen, glancing out the window every few seconds, her heart aching for the puppy. He had been so brave, so determined to protect them. She could only hope he was okay. Minutes felt like hours as she waited. The boy, sensing her worry, clung to her leg, his big, innocent eyes filled with confusion. "Is Puppy okay, Mommy?" he asked softly. She knelt down and hugged him, forcing a reassuring smile onto her face. "Puppy's very brave," she said. "He'll be okay." But deep down, she wasn't so sure. The minutes dragged on like hours, each one filled with growing tension. The boy sat by the window, his small face pressed against the glass, watching the line of trees for any sign of movement. His mother stayed close, her phone clutched tightly in her hand as she debated whether to call for help. She couldn't shake the feeling that something more than a stray animal was lurking out there. The puppy's fearless reaction had been too deliberate, too urgent. Suddenly, the boy's excited voice broke through the silence. "Mommy, look! It's Puppy!" He pointed eagerly, and her eyes darted to where he was looking. Sure enough, the puppy was emerging from the shadows of the trees, his little body covered in dirt and leaves. Relief washed over her as she rushed to the door and flung it open, scooping the puppy into her arms. "Oh, thank goodness!" she whispered, her voice shaking. But as she held him, she noticed something strange. The puppy wasn't his usual squirmy, playful self. His heart was racing, and his eyes seemed to plead with her as he whimpered softly. He wriggled out of her grasp and darted back toward the trees, barking insistently. It was as though he was trying to tell her something, trying to lead her to something important. Her instincts battled against each other. Every rational part of her screamed to stay inside, to protect her son, but something about the puppy's desperation pulled at her. She turned to her son. "Stay right here, okay? Don't move from the window. Mommy will be right back." She locked the door behind her and followed the puppy, her heart pounding with each step. The trees loomed larger as she approached, their shadows growing darker. The puppy led her deeper into the grove, his small body moving with purpose. She kept her eyes and ears sharp, scanning for any sign of danger. Just as she began to doubt her decision, she saw a figure slumped against the base of a tree, partially hidden by the undergrowth. Her breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer. It was a man, his clothes torn and dirty, his face pale and scratched. He was conscious but clearly weak, his voice barely a whisper as he tried to speak. "Help please," he managed, his hand trembling as he reached out. She froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. Who was he? How had he ended up here? And why had the puppy been so determined to find him? Questions raced through her mind, but there was no time to hesitate. She pulled out her phone and dialed emergency services, quickly explaining the situation. The dispatcher assured her that help was on the way. As she waited, she knelt beside the man, trying to keep him calm. The puppy sat protectively by her side, his eyes darting around as if still on high alert. The man's words came out in broken fragments. "Lost 2 days, thought no one would." He didn't finish, his voice fading into a hoarse whisper. When the paramedics arrived, they worked quickly to stabilize him. They explained that he had likely been hiking when he got lost and injured, unable to make his way back. "If you hadn't found him when you did," one of them said, "it might have been too late." As they loaded the man into the ambulance, she looked down at the puppy, who was now wagging his tail as if nothing had happened. "You knew," she whispered, scratching behind his ears. "You knew he needed help." The puppy barked softly, his way of agreeing, and she smiled through the tears welling up in her eyes. The story could have ended there, a miraculous rescue, a happy ending, but there was one more twist. A few days later, a knock came at the door. It was the man from the woods, now clean and healthy, holding a small box. "I wanted to thank you," he said, his voice steady. "And your dog. He's a hero." She invited him in, and as they talked, he shared something remarkable. "When I first got lost, I heard barking in the distance. I thought I was imagining things, but it gave me hope. Your dog didn't just find me, he kept me going when I thought I couldn't take another step." As the man placed the box on the table, he added, "I wanted to give you this. It's not much, but it's a token of my gratitude." Inside was a small medal, engraved with the words, "To the bravest pup, with endless thanks." The boy clapped his hands in delight, and the puppy barked proudly, as if he understood the honor being bestowed upon him. From that day forward, the little dog became a neighborhood legend, his story inspiring everyone who heard it. And while life eventually returned to normal, the family never forgot the day their brave puppy saved not just their child, but a stranger in need. The days that followed were filled with a mixture of calm and reflection. Life at home began to settle back into its usual rhythm, but there was a noticeable shift in the family's perspective. The events surrounding the puppy's bravery became a cornerstone of their conversations, not just because of the remarkable rescue but because of what it symbolized: love, loyalty, and the unexpected strength of even the smallest among us. The boy, too young to fully grasp the weight of what had happened, simply adored his puppy even more. He would often sit on the floor, holding the medal in his tiny hands and repeating, "Puppy's a hero," as the dog wagged his tail enthusiastically. His innocence was a comforting reminder of the simplicity of love and connection, the very things that had driven their furry friend to act so selflessly. For the mother, the experience lingered in her thoughts in a different way. She found herself marveling at how instinct and love had propelled the puppy into action. It made her think deeply about how often we underestimate the value of those who seem small or powerless. This tiny creature, who couldn't speak a single word, had understood the urgency of the moment better than anyone else. It humbled her, teaching her to listen more closely, not just to her dog, but to the quiet signals the world often sends. The man who had been rescued stayed in touch with the family. He returned to visit a few times, always with a treat for the puppy and a warm smile for the little boy. It became clear that the ordeal had profoundly impacted him as well. He spoke often about how he had nearly given up hope, how hearing the distant bark of a dog had reminded him that he wasn't alone. "Your dog saved my life in more ways than one," he said during one visit, his voice thick with emotion. "He didn't just pull me out of the woods, he pulled me back to myself." The family and the man began to forge an unexpected friendship. Over time, they learned more about his story. He had been hiking to clear his mind after a difficult chapter in his life, searching for clarity in the solitude of nature. What he found instead was a connection that reminded him of the strength of community and the importance of not facing challenges alone. Inspired by the puppy's courage, he decided to channel his gratitude into action, becoming a volunteer with a local search and rescue team. "If a little dog can make such a difference," he said, "imagine what we can do when we work together." The puppy, meanwhile, became something of a local celebrity. News of his bravery spread quickly, and soon neighbors were stopping by to hear the story firsthand. Some brought gifts: a new collar, a basket of treats, even a custom dog bed embroidered with the word hero. The boy loved showing off the medal, his eyes lighting up as he proudly explained how his best friend had saved the day. One weekend, the family was invited to share their story at a local community event. The mother was hesitant at first, worried about being in the spotlight, but she realized it was an opportunity to inspire others. Standing on the small stage with her son holding the puppy, she recounted the events of that day with warmth and gratitude. "This little guy reminded us that bravery isn't about size or strength," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "It's about love. It's about stepping up when it matters most." The audience erupted in applause, and the puppy barked as if he knew the praise was for him. Afterward, people approached the family with tears in their eyes, sharing how the story had touched them. Some spoke of their own pets and the unspoken bonds they cherished. Others reflected on moments in their lives when unexpected acts of courage had made all the difference. It became clear that this wasn't just a story about a dog, it was a story about all of us, about the power of connection and the extraordinary potential within the ordinary. As time passed, the story began to fade from public memory, as all things eventually do. But for the family, it remained a cherished chapter in their lives, retold during quiet evenings and remembered fondly as they watched their puppy grow. The boy, now a little older, loved to run through the yard with his best friend, their laughter and barking blending into the sounds of the neighborhood. The mother found herself smiling more often, her heart lighter with the lessons the experience had taught her. She began to volunteer at a local animal shelter, wanting to give back in honor of the little dog who had changed their lives. "Every animal has a story," she would say to visitors. "Sometimes, they're just waiting for someone to help them write the next chapter." The man, true to his word, became a dedicated member of the search and rescue team. He often spoke about the dog who had inspired him, using the story as a way to encourage others to step outside their comfort zones and make a difference. His gratitude became a driving force in his life, shaping the way he approached every challenge and opportunity. Years later, long after the puppy had grown into a wise old dog, the family still felt the ripple effects of that extraordinary day. It wasn't just a story they told, it was a reminder of what mattered most. The little dog's bravery had saved more than a life, it had saved their perspective, teaching them to see the world with more compassion and courage. One quiet evening, as the boy, now a teenager, sat on the porch with his aging dog at his feet, he looked up at the sky and smiled. "You're still my hero," he said softly, scratching the dog's ears. The dog let out a contented sigh, his tail wagging slowly. And in that moment, everything felt right in the world, a world where love, loyalty, and a little bit of bravery could make all the difference.